Hey folks, welcome. This week I wanted to talk a little bit about just some general research ideas, concerns, questions, observations that I've made over the course of the week, both in and outside of our class Moodle page. So, the first thing I want to do is thank you all for your introductions and for starting to think about your research ideas and your design. I know probably a few of you are not too fond of taking a research methods or research design class, and it might be a little frightening, unknown territory, a little scary. But let me reassure you that we are all researchers, whether it's doing a cost comparison on cereal at the grocery store or cars. We research a lot of things. We research what we want to watch on television. Is it going to fit in the time frame that we have to be able to watch it? Is it going to be a particular interest to us? Is it going to appeal to our intellect or to our mind-numbing, I just want to sit here and have something on TV that I don't have to think about mentality. So you'll know from a few minutes from now that I am a super TV junkie. Was raised with the TV on all the time, had it on every time I was writing on my dissertation, keep it on a lot while I work now too, and a lot of times it's just background noise. And I'm not sure if it helps or hinders, but I've done okay with TV on in the background all the time. So thank you for embarking on the research design class. I appreciate it, and I look forward to hearing more about your individual works and areas of interest. For this course, it's helpful if you have a professional or work-related idea to research, but you don't need to. It can be something that you're personally interested in, and that works out just fine. Some of the big things to think about is, what is your personal bias with wanting to research a particular topic? You all know I'm an animal lover, and so potentially one of my biases is that animals are great for us. I think that life without having a pet would be, I can't even imagine what it would be like. So for me, that's an inherent bias, and I can't get rid of it. It doesn't mean I shouldn't study the impact of pets on people. It just means I need to acknowledge my own bias, make sure that I try my best to get it out of my research study, but also let the readers know when I'm writing up my research for public dissemination that I have this bias. So they know that there might be a little to the research. It might not be as cut and dry. You may want to read something that comes from someone who's not an animal lover when you're reading something that comes from an animal lover. So you get that middle ground somewhere. Because as much as we try, it's nearly impossible to get rid of 100% of bias when we create a research project, idea, or design. So just acknowledge that as you think about your research topic for this class. The other big thing is that words matter. Every word matters. And it matters for several reasons. One being an implied bias. So if I was reporting on a study and I used the phrase, the end results went up by a mere 5%, that word mere means something. And it gives an implication of something. A non-biased writing sample from that same statement would be that the end results showed an increase of 5%. No bias there whatsoever. Cut and dry. We are not saying that we think it should have gone up more or we should have gone down less. We're just stating the facts. And for some people, that's hard to do, and it's hard to get used to doing, because as human beings, we want things to have meaning. We're not giving things meaning, we're just trying to explain things. And that's really tough for us to get our minds wrapped around. But once you do, it's pretty easy to do that with everything. So you want to make sure that you're understanding your inflection and your emotions behind everything that you're writing and you're talking about in terms of research. The other way that words matter is in the definitions. And if you're writing a statement that says, people who watch TV will have a higher level of intelligence than people who don't watch TV, or just let's leave it at that. People who watch TV will have a higher level of intelligence. Then what? How are we defining intelligence? What's higher mean? Are we looking for a certain benchmark? Are we looking for 5%, 50%, 75%? How are we defining higher? How are we defining TV? So nowadays, when we have a television set, we have the computer, we have our smartphones, we can watch television shows. We can watch things happen anywhere and everywhere. So what's our definition of television and TV? Are we defining nature shows, reality TV shows, game shows, dramas, comedies? We need to be very, very clear in every word that we use. And as you're working on your research in this class, you'll see me circle things on your papers and send it back to you like, what does that mean? How are you defining this? So think about that ahead of time, because you will need to define almost every single word that you're going to use. One word that comes up a lot is more. And so, do pets make life more happy? Okay, so that makes the assumption that life is happy without pets. And so now when we involve pets in it, then we have to go more happy. So you see how every single word matters. Another example, if you're going to do an examination or a research study about people with long hair. So I wore my hair down purposely for this video today. What does long mean? Long, to some of you, maybe 6 inches, 8 inches long. Might be, I don't know, half an inch is long hair for people. But is it like 3 feet? So we have to define that. It can make you a little bit nuts when you're starting to think about defining everything, but clearly I can't emphasize that enough. So think about it very carefully when you're writing, because you're going to have to defend it and define it later on. Another big issue with, I'm looking at our book, so in case you're wondering. Another big issue with research is what type of research do you want to do? And I mentioned earlier that I'm more of a quantitative person. How you structure your research question is going to inform how you structure your actual study. So if I wanted to know, for example, how many people in our class have hair longer than 8 inches, and then that's a simple little quantitative tally, how many. But if I wanted to know why they have long hair, then I would structure a qualitative study and ask people, why do you have long hair? What's the background of your hair story? And so you really want to think about, what do you want to know? Or what hasn't been asked yet in a particular field? And then ask that question. But you have to make the assumption that if you're asking why something is happening, the assumption then is that it does happen. And do you know that? Do you know if something does happen, so that you can then ask the why? So your order of questions in your research design program or study is going to be very important too. So as you're looking at your research design questions or topics for this class, ask yourself, does it happen? And if it's a yes, then you can go on how, when, why. But if the answer is no, then maybe you want to find out if it does happen. Okay. There was a great episode of Mythbusters Junior on this week that had to do with reliability. And again, this is another case of words mattering. The myth that the Mythbusters juniors were looking at was that a dog will shake off over 70% of the water from a bath in one shake once they're out of the bathtub. So I'm like, all right, this is kind of interesting. And then they had one dog that they brought in, 15-pound dog, medium hair, schnauzer type. And they tested him with it. So weighed him dry, gave him a bath, weighed him wet, weighed him after he shook. And if you've seen the dog shake, they're kind of fun like that. And he didn't get to the 70%. So what they then did was brought in 6 different dogs of various sizes. So from a very small 8-pound Yorkie all the way up to a Great Dane and a Burmese Mountain Dog. So different hair lengths, different fur lengths, different purpose for their breeds. There was a Labrador Retriever. And they did the same thing to each dog to see what the percentage of water was that the dog would shed in that first shake after a bath. And I think the average over all of the dogs came out to about 63%. Some dogs were over the 70%, most dogs were under. And if you want to know more about that episode, I will tell you. Ask me. But the thing I wanted to talk about with that in particular is the idea of samples. And when you only have one sample to look at, it's hard to make generalizations or big statements about things. So as you're looking at your research design for this course, you may want to shrink down what you're looking at. You might not be able to make generalizations about all 5th graders or generalizations about all educational administrators. So scale it way down. Who do you want to look at, and why do you want to look at them, and what's your rationale for that? And keeping those words succinct and very clearly defined for everybody, even people who may not be aware of your research topic, and those who are intimately knowledgeable about what you're talking about. Make the assumption that we know nothing, and that's always the best way to write about research. Last thing, experimental designs are very challenging to do. So a lot of times the non-experimental design will be the one that people choose most because it's a more realistic, real-world type of study. Experimental designs happen in isolation, mostly in medical or clinical type settings, and are hard to replicate. So non-experimental designs are typical, causal, comparative, are pretty high on the list as well. I don't get too wrapped up in the types there, except the difference between experimental and non-experimental. And it'd be great to do an experimental, but it's really hard to be able to do that in terms of controlling for variables outside of the clinic or the study lab. So let me see. So I think that's a good 13 and a half minutes on this already, but I do want to make sure that I'm hitting some of the things that I think are important, both from the course content, but also for your course work. I want you to be able to be working smarter, not so much harder, and hopefully you're seeing that in the quizzes too. The quiz questions are designed to help you think through your research design for your final project. So, and if that is not working for you, let me know, but I think that's going to be a great big help. So I hope you're all having a great weekend.